What if law schools needed you more than you needed them? I know it sounds backwards because law school admissions can feel like a one-way power dynamic where they've got the rankings, they've got the prestige, they've got the leverage, and you're supposed to be grateful just to get a spot on the wait list. But there is something big changing, and almost nobody is talking about it yet. I'm talking about something structural. And while applicant numbers are up significantly this cycle, they're up 50% over the past 2 years, something big is going to change in the next few years that will radically change law school admissions. It'll become significantly easier to get in, and it has nothing to do with your resume. It's got to do with demographics. There is a phenomenon happening in the US economy called the demographic cliff. It's simple math. Starting in 2008, during the financial crisis, families had fewer kids. And that decline did not bounce back. Even after the economy recovered, the birth rate stayed low. People delayed having children or didn't have them at all, which brings us to today, nearly 20 years later. Those babies who were not born in 2008 would have been 17 today, finishing high school, going off to college, starting law school, but there aren't as many of them because of the declining birth rate. And so we're seeing a 20% drop in birth rates over a shorter period, meaning there are millions of students that law schools and colleges could accept who just are not even going to apply, which means that colleges and law schools will be competing for a smaller and smaller group of applicants. So in other words, fewer kids means fewer high school graduates, fewer college students, fewer college grads, fewer law school applicants. And law schools aren't feeling the pinch yet, but they do see it coming. And when it hits, it's going to hit fast. They are modeling and tracking this in the Higher Education Demand Index, which predicts massive declines in enrollment starting this year in 2026, accelerating into the 2030s. And the hardest hit groups are the very students most likely to apply to grad school. And so, translation, if you're applying to law school in the next 3 to 7 years, you're going to be entering the system at a time when schools are seeing fewer applicants and they have more pressure to admit, which means you're not going to be competing with as many people. Schools are going to be less selective because they don't have a choice, and you'll be more likely to get in and more likely to get scholarship money also. And the best part is you don't even have to do anything manipulative or unethical to take advantage of the shift. You've just got to understand what's happening and make smart decisions. Now, I've been teaching the LSAT for the past 20 years. I've seen a number of changes over the decades. I've seen the 2008 financial crisis leading to a spike in law school applicant numbers in the short term as people look to wait out the economy. I saw it again in 2020 with the pandemic. I saw it again the last couple of years with the so-called Trump bump in the presidential election cycle and all the economic uncertainty that results from AI and the disruption of the economy as a result. People are basically looking to go to law school to wait out the bad economy, hoping that things turn around a couple of years later. And so I've seen the full journey that applicants go through. I see the panic that sets in when somebody scores below their practice average, the financial stress of taking out hundreds of thousands of dollars in tuition to pay for the loans to pay out for the tuition, and the pressure of getting into a top law school. And so when I see that law school is going to become easier to get into, I don't mean it's going to be a cakewalk. I just mean the game is changing. And what this means is that you've got to look at the birth rates that happened back in 2008. Fewer kids, a precipitous drop continuing into today. In 2007, the fertility rate was around 2.1, which is the replacement level. Today, it's closer to 1.6. And so that chain reaction means that law schools that are tuition dependent are going to need to dig deeper into the applicant pool to maintain class sizes. Because Harvard, Yale, Stanford, they've got massive endowments. They don't need to rely on tuition dollars to maintain their overhead. And schools in the bottom tier, they can't dig much deeper because they risk taking on students who will drop out of law school, are going to fail out, and won't be able to pass the bar. But the schools in the middle, they're in the sweet spot where They could increase class sizes a little bit, and they could also dig deeper into the pool, meaning that it's going to be easier to get into those schools. They will have to, no choice but to lower their standards a little bit, which means LSAT medians will drop, GPA medians will drop as well. And the only way that schools will be able to avoid dropping those medians would be to give scholarship money. And so while it's going to be easier to get in, for you as an applicant, very little changes, because what you want to do from your perspective is apply with the strongest numbers possible. Now, your GPA might already be pretty fixed at this point in time, because if you're applying to law school, you've probably already finished out most of undergrad, but the LSAT score still remains the biggest factor that you can control to maximize your outcomes. But if you're applying in this demographic cliff environment, if you're applying in a couple of years, what this means is that you might be able to get into better law schools than you otherwise would have been able to get into, and you also might be able to get in with more scholarship money. Great situation to be in. Wonderful situation. And so if you're applying this cycle, of course, doesn't affect you, sorry to say. But if you're a freshman in college right now, a high school senior watching right now, you're kind of toying with the idea of law school. If you are applying in 2030 or so, it's going to be a radically different situation. Reason being, they are tuition dependent, they need your money, and the demand curve has shifted to benefit you as the applicant. In other words, the schools need you more than you need them. The majority of their revenue comes from you, the student who's paying tens of thousands of dollars per year. They don't have the football stadiums, they don't have the billion-dollar endowments. Most schools outside the T14 are running a pretty tight ship. And so if their enrollment drops, their budgets take a hit instantly. And so when the number of applicants falls, they can't just take in fewer students. They've got to protect their income. And so the first big consequence is lower admissions standards, lower GPA cutoffs, lower LSAT cutoffs, more soft factors being weighed, more leniency for imperfect transcripts and career changes or gaps in your timeline. Doesn't mean that schools will just take anybody, because they do still have to protect the rankings, but they are going to loosen the standards from 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Now, when applications drop, some schools actually increase the number of students they admit, because if you normally take in 300 students from 3,000 applicants, and now you only have 2,000 applicants, your acceptance rate has to go up. But instead of cutting the class to 200 students, you push it to 325 or 350 students to keep tuition dollars steady. And of course, that might affect student-faculty ratios or classroom space, but those are short-term trade-offs, because for the school, survival matters more. And for you, that means there are more seats available, especially at mid-tier and lower-ranked schools. Now, when competition drops, prices drop. And when law schools are fighting to attract top applicants, they offer more money, more merit scholarships, more need-based aid, more diversity grants, more fee waivers, more willingness to match offers from competing schools. And we're already seeing that some schools are now offering automatic merit scholarships if you hit a certain LSAT or GPA threshold, no essay even required. Other schools might give you money just for applying early or as part of a negotiation tactic if you mention another school's offer. We also are seeing schools simplifying the process with easier applications. They're waiving application fees, they're making essays optional, they're giving priority consideration for early applications, and some schools even send out preemptive acceptances, kind of like when a credit card company mails you an offer without your even applying, because they want to lock you in early. If they can grab your attention before you hear back from a better offer, they win. And this is all to your benefit if you know what to look for and how to use it. We also see law schools offering more part-time JD programs, more online hybrid formats, more evening and weekend classes to widen the applicant pool, because a school knows that if it can't attract enough traditional 22-year-old poli-sci majors, they've got to start marketing to a different cohort like working professionals, career switchers, and so on. And that's great for you, especially if you fall outside the typical applicant profile. Now, law schools are starting to prepare for this new environment, and you can benefit from this situation if you know how to play the game. The biggest takeaway I want to leave you with is negotiate like the competitive applicant you are. They need you more than you need them. And so if you ask them to waive application fees, they're likely to say yes. If you have a better offer from another school, you come back to that top choice and say, hey, I'd love to go to your school, but school B offered me more money and financial realities are real. And so can you match or exceed their offer? If so, I'd love to go to your school instead. And you'd be surprised. A lot of schools will entertain those kinds of offers, but you've got to ask. It's on you as the skeptical, careful consumer to treat it like the negotiation that it is. Now, I see a ton of questions coming into the chat here. I will get to as many of those as I can. Feel free to drop them in. And by the way, folks, if you've got a more personal situation, you want to talk through your LSAT law school journey, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody watching this now or later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer to anybody watching this now or later. Happy to meet with you personally and talk you through your situation, help you craft your plan of attack. So Mac Chicken is asking, what are your thoughts on a gap year for law school? Is it a necessary thing? So do you mean a gap year between going to graduating undergrad and starting law school? I mean, it's certainly not necessary, but if you want to do it, by all means, go for it. There's no time like the present, and you will be far too busy after law school to take a gap year. You'll be paying off those loans if you have any loans. And so I'd recommend going while you can when you have fewer obligations. And if you already have your LSAT score locked in, you've already applied, you could always defer your acceptance for a year. Most schools will give you a year to delay law school before attending. So yeah, by all means, pursue it. Not a red flag of any sort, not a bad thing to do. And if you feel moved to do it, by all means, go for it. Daniel saying, I've got my LSAT in 1 hour. I'm taking it then. Awesome, Daniel. Good luck. Hope you rock it. My biggest advice for you in this final hour is rest, relax, go for a walk, get some fresh air, do a couple of warm-up questions before you start the exam, and walk in feeling cool, confident, and ready to crush it. Zohola's asking, what are your day of LSAT recommendations or requirements? So for the day of the LSAT, I recommend waking up early, setting multiple alarms. You don't want to miss the test, of course. Set out everything early in the day, if not the night before. So your government-issued photo ID, your snacks, your drinks, your pencils, erasers, scratch paper, all of that, have it ready to go so that it's next to your computer and you're ready to hit start the second that the exam is beginning. That also includes having your warm-up questions prepared. So a favorite LSAT passage, a handful of logical reasoning questions, the idea being that you don't want the first questions you're doing that day to be the ones that really matter. And don't do any crazy cramming or the day before or day of. You want to go in feeling fresh, like you've seen it all before, because the LSAT is not a test that you cram for. It's not memorization. It's skills-based pattern recognition. So at this point, either you know it or you don't. And if you're feeling anxious for peace of mind, you might want to sign up for a later LSAT test date. And so that way you're not feeling like it all rides on this one exam. Because while the LSAT as a whole is incredibly important, no one particular LSAT test date will make or break you. And so if you were already signed up for the February LSAT as a backup when you're taking January, not a bad move. You could also sign up for the April LSAT so that you have that as a backup as well. Not even that you're necessarily planning to take that LSAT, but just knowing that you've got that one in your back pocket, worst case scenario. Got a question from Linty Boy asking, is the LSAT administered in the same questions pattern of LR, RC, LR, LC throughout the whole day? No, it is not. So there are several different LSAT test forms being administered simultaneously on the same day. So you might have a different reading comp section from somebody else, but they're both official scored sections. Same goes for logical reasoning. Of course, the reason being that LSAC doesn't want you taking it at 9 a.m., telling your friend taking it at 3 p.m. what was on the test. That would, of course, compromise the integrity of the LSAT. So they're constantly scrambling and mixing things up using different sections, different test forms to prevent that kind of cheating. Rand says, I just took it. What should I expect now? So you're saying that you just took the official LSAT today? Awesome, Rand. I hope that you crushed it. In terms of next steps, you've got a wait of about 3 weeks before you get your LSAT score back. I think that January LSAT scores come back on the 28th, if I'm not mistaken, 3 weeks from today at 9 a.m. Eastern time. And so all you've got to do is sit back, take it easy, and find some way to keep yourself busy for the next 3 weeks. The only other things I would recommend doing are, number one, do the writing sample if you haven't yet already. The writing sample is unscored, but it is still required in order for LSAC to release your score. If you already have a writing sample on record, you don't have to do another one, but you could, of course. The second thing I'd recommend is, if you're applying to law school this cycle, work on all your application essays. So your personal statement, your diversity or adversity statement, optional essays, addenda, letters of rec, pull all of those together so that you can hit submit on your applications the second that your score comes back on the 28th. But aside from writing sample and applications, there's nothing else you really need to do. Just relax, stay off Reddit, stay off the forums, take it easy, get back to anything you've been neglecting over the past month or however long you've been studying for. You do deserve a break at this point. Taking the LSAT itself is an accomplishment, so just congrats for that itself. Just scanning through here for other questions that are coming in. Got a question asking, could fellowship programs make your application more attractive? Yeah, they sure could. I mean, if you're talking about like a Fulbright, for example, that's awesome. Definitely include that on your application in your resume. But law school admissions is still primarily numbers driven. So it's your LSAT score, then your GPA, everything else being a distant third. And so a fellowship program is nice to have, but it's not going to get you in if you don't already have the numbers. It could be a tiebreaker, though, if you do have the numbers relative to another applicant who does not have the numbers. So include it on your resume, include it in your application, make clear that you've got it, and that is impressive, of course, but make sure you've got the LSAT and the GPA first and foremost. Haley's asking, how can I avoid feeling burnout from studying without forgetting what I've learned or falling behind? So you want to have a good study plan in place. You want to have a strong foundation in the different sections, different question types. You want to work on pacing with individual sections, and you want to take full-length exams to build up your endurance. But everything has its place, and we've got to start with the end in mind. And so if you're taking the LSAT in February, just a month away, you want to focus on full-length exams because your test is coming up. You got to work on endurance. You can't neglect it. If you need more time to both build a strong foundation and work on pacing, in addition to full-length practice tests, then you might want to push back your test date to give yourself more time to achieve your fullest potential. So don't try to cram all of your LSAT prep into just 1 month if you need more time. You also want to build days off into your study plan so that you don't burn out, because LSAT prep is a marathon, not a sprint. You can't cram it, it's not memorization. So you avoid burnout by spreading your LSAT studying over a long enough period of time such that you have time for days off and you have time to build the foundation before jumping into full practice tests. And if you want my help crafting your personal LSAT plan of attack, I'm offering free private LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody out there watching this now or later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. I also offer these free live classes every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever else you're watching this. Happy to meet with you personally and talk you through your situation, help you craft your plan of attack for whatever your target LSAT test date might be. Got a question about LSAT test dates when you can take it. So the LSAT's offered 8 times a year. It's offered January, February, April, and June. This past year, it was also offered in August, September, October, and November, 4 consecutive months. They'll probably offer it those same months this year coming up, but they have not yet released the dates. They'll do so probably this spring. So you've got plenty of chances to take it, which of course I hope would help reduce anxiety just a little bit, because you know you've always got another LSAT coming up in just another month or two. So for those of you taking the LSAT this week in January, of course, I hope that you crush it. But if you don't, just retake it in February or retake it in April. And law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take the highest score on record. So there really is no downside to retaking, because if you take it again and do better, awesome. You've now got a higher score, and if not, no big deal. Got other questions coming in here. Just going to scan through the chat. Hey, Alex, welcome. Alex just said, this is Alex. I'm like, hi, Alex, welcome. Thanks for joining. Got a question asking, does the writing sample matter? Yes and no. The writing sample is currently unscored, so it doesn't matter nearly as much as the scored portions of the LSAT. And so when I've got people asking me, what should I do for the writing sample? I'm like, well, are you consistently scoring a 180 on your practice tests? Because if not, I would say, stop thinking about the writing sample. Just master the scored parts of the LSAT first, then come back to the writing sample. Of course, you've got to do the writing sample for them to release your score, but you want to have the score first and foremost. LSAC has indicated that they are likely to score the writing sample in the next couple years, but until they do that, I'd say focus on logical reasoning and reading comp and stop procrastinating from the scored parts that matter in favor of something that you might feel like it's easier, but is not nearly as impactful. Sammy's asking, I've got a 397 GPA and a 169 LSAT. What are my chances at the T14s? So the T14, meaning the top 14 law schools, their LSAT medians are all 170 to 174. And so if you've got a 169, you are below all of their LSAT medians. Additionally, and I hate to say this, but law school admissions officers are humans, and so they are just as vulnerable to the optics of a 169 looking a lot lower than a 170 does. It's only 1 point, but it looks radically different just in terms of visuals. And so if you could bump up your score even just 1 point, it would do a lot to help you with the T14s. Your 397 GPA, however, is awesome. It is above median. The top 14 GPA medians are all roughly 3.9 and up. And so you're good on GPA, but you do want to pull up that LSAT. If you blanketed the T14 and you applied to all 14 of them, maybe you get into a couple, but why leave it to chance? If you got a 175 on the LSAT, if you raise your score 6 points, you will have much better outcomes. And the January LSAT is not too late for this cycle. The February LSAT also is not too late for this cycle. And so if you're already signed up for one of those, and I hope you are, I'd say go for it. It's well worth the take or the retake to get your numbers up. Mel says, what if I have a high GPA, but a low LSAT score in the 140s? The sad truth is that it's a lot easier to have a high GPA than it is to have a high LSAT because of rampant grade inflation. Law schools know that if you major in the humanities, it's easy to get a high GPA, so they discount those high GPAs. In contrast, it's not as easy to get a high LSAT score, and LSAT scores are, of course, more strongly correlated with first-year law school grades and bar passage rates than GPAs are. And so if your LSAT is in the 140s, law schools will have some reasonable questions about your ability to succeed in law school. Not saying that you can't, of course. There are plenty of people with low LSATs who make great attorneys and pass the bar, but you are relatively more likely to do better in law school and pass the bar if you have a higher LSAT score. And so my advice to you is don't make a $200,000 bet on law school if you don't yet have the LSAT score to back it up. First, get the score, ideally 165, 170, then apply. That way you will have shown yourself you've got what it takes for law school, and you will also have much better outcomes when it comes to getting into better law schools and also getting more scholarship money. And if you want my help getting that LSAT score up, you can, of course, book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. Link below the video, pinned in the chat. In my bio, I'm happy to meet with you personally, one-on-one over video, and talk through your situation. M is asking, when should I start studying for the LSAT if I'm currently a sophomore in undergrad? So you could start now if you feel ready, if you have the time, if you're confident that law school is in your future. But I'd also advise you, make sure that law school is what you want to do and make sure that you can maintain a top GPA. It's possible that you should just focus on the GPA for the next year, get it as high as possible, explore whether law school is right for you, then come back to this when you're a junior, and then start studying for the LSAT. If you want to do some light LSAT prep for now, of course, you could. As a pre-LSAT study, you could read the book, A Rule Book for Arguments. It's not an LSAT-specific book, but it does cover the kinds of reasoning that are tested on the LSAT. It's a nice way to dip your toes into the waters. Got a question from Jim Aficionado asking for quick reading comp tips for a 170 scorer. I want to get into the high 170s. Quick RC tips. So my first question for you would be, what is your current reading comp approach like? I find that a lot of students take far too many notes, do too much highlighting, underlining, notes on the scratch paper, summaries. It just takes too long. So I'd recommend keeping it more minimal, fewer notes. Don't rely on the LSAC highlighting and underlining. It's far too time consuming, and it's also a bit glitchy on the LSAC platform. If you're using any prep company or third-party platform, it often looks, it doesn't work the same way software-wise. And so you're in for a bit of a rude awakening when you do the third-party platform, then you switch to LSAC and you see a radical change in the functionality not working the way that it should. So I'd always recommend doing your actual practice tests on the Law Hub platform to get ready for the actual test day experience and minimize the note-taking. I typically recommend spending 2.5 to 3 minutes on your initial read of the passage so that you have more time for the questions associated. I see that you're spending about 3 to 4 minutes carefully reading the passage. I would say maybe shorten that a little bit down to only 3 minutes so that you have more time for the questions. Because on average, you have roughly 9 minutes per passage and the associated questions. So if you're spending 4 minutes on the read and the notes, if any, you then already have less than a minute per question. You want to give yourself at least a minute. It really needs it in most cases. So maybe shorten your initial read a little bit, and that'll do a lot more for you to give yourself sufficient time to answer the questions. And of course, if you want to talk through your situation, I'm happy to meet with you personally and talk through your plan of attack. A question on how to improve working memory, forgetting the details. I don't think that you need to try and memorize all the details on your initial read. I would focus instead on just trying to take away the main idea, primary purpose, author's opinion, any major viewpoints being presented or advocated in the passage. Just aim to walk away with those only, because the details, the examples, you can always go back to those later to find those when you need to help you solve any specific questions. And if you want to talk through coaching options, we always personalize the program for the individual student. We look at your current score, your goal score, and your time frame between now and your target test date. So in other words, a student who wants to improve 10 points over the next month will need a very different kind of program than a student who wants to improve 20 points in 3 months. We look at the goal and the time frame that you have to achieve that goal, and we craft the plan of attack for you around all of that. Modi's asking, What book suggestions do you have for juniors just starting LSAT prep? So I actually don't recommend any specific LSAT prep books because the LSAT is online now, and there have been so many changes over the past few years that a lot of the books are outdated and don't reflect the current LSAT format. I mean, just in the past 6 years or so, it's gone from being on paper to on a tablet to the temporary LSAT Flex format with only 3 sections to the 4 sections to removal of logic games and replacing it with a second logical reasoning section. So a lot of the books that you see out there reflect one or another of these old outdated formats, and you don't want to be using some hand-me-down prep book for this reason. I mean, the LSAT is now online, so we recommend studying like it's going to be on test day. I always recommend using the official LSAC Law Hub platform. You get 4 exams for free on that platform, and then you get another 56 or so, 55 or so with your Law Hub Advantage subscription. It's $120 for a full year of access. Well worth the investment. I see Jim is saying I've got 5 of the official books. Miserable to practice with them. Yeah, I mean, it's not the current format. If you have accommodations for taking the LSAT on paper, then of course, different story. But for the vast majority of students, I'd say use the Law Hub platform, take it online. Don't use the third-party platforms because they actually, in many cases, work better than what you're going to have on test day from LSAC using the Prometric software. Kate's asking, is a 2.8 undergraduate GPA from 11 years ago a non-starter regardless of LSAT score? No, it's not. It's totally fine. The good thing about being a so-called non-traditional or older applicant is that law schools will discount your GPA because who you were 11 years ago is not who you are today. You've grown, you've matured, and so it's not reflective of your current academic abilities. They will place less emphasis on your GPA and place more emphasis on your LSAT score because your LSAT score is more recent and also a more objective measure because it's not susceptible to the same grade inflation that GPAs are. So don't worry about the undergraduate GPA. It is what it is. You can't change it at this point, but all the more reason to focus on getting the highest possible LSAT score. And then, of course, you also want to highlight any work experience that you have. Val is saying, I graduated 5 years ago. My GPA is really low. I'm retaking the LSAT in February. I need your help. And so you've got about a month between now and then. I'm happy to meet with you personally, talk you through your situation. If your GPA is low, you want to balance it out with a higher LSAT score. You're going to be a so-called splitter applicant. Totally fine. Law schools love splitters, and in fact, nearly every single ABA-approved law school weighs LSAT scores more heavily than undergraduate GPAs. And so you can more than make up for a lower GPA with a higher LSAT score. And I see Jim saying that he or she is not a native English speaker, doesn't read a lot in English, primarily using Spanish. So if that's the case, reading in general will help with reading comprehension on the LSAT. But if you're taking the LSAT in the short term, I would suggest that you focus on LSAT specific materials because you've got limited time and there is an abundance of LSAT material to study from. You've got hundreds and hundreds of official reading comprehension passages, approximately 400 of them, and most people aren't even going to go through a small fraction of them. So print some out, read them on the beach, in the bathroom, on your commute, whatever. Absorb them all because the LSAT has a very particular way of writing. They take real-world source material and they adapt it for use on the LSAT, writing in that convoluted academic legalese style. So read as many of them as you can. As an exercise, you might try reading a handful and just articulating or prephrasing for yourself what is the main idea, what is the author's opinion. If they could leave you with only one central concept, what would that concept or takeaway be? Then you scan through the choices for the main idea question and see what matches up well. I've got someone saying that I'm echoing. Is anyone else experiencing that, or can everyone hear me okay? Okay, so Gabrielle is saying, I graduate in December and plan to apply for the 2027 entrance. When should I take my LSAT? So LSAT scores are good for 5 years. And so I'd say take it whenever you're ready. You could take it now. You could take it in the next 3 to 6 months if you were able to study in the short term. Lock in that score, secure it, then apply in the fall to start law school 1 year later. So in other words, you could take the LSAT in April of 2026, take it in June as a retake for your backup, then apply in September of 2026 and start law school in September 2027. Might not be a bad idea. If you've got the next 3 to 5 months to study for the LSAT seriously, you knock it out, you plan ahead. I wish that more students took that approach. Rush is asking, does one session with you really help beginners? I mean, only one way to find out. One of the reasons that students go for LSAT coaching is because the thing is that when you're studying on your own, you don't know what you don't know. And so getting some expert guidance from someone who's already been there, been through that process themselves, gotten that top score, it's going to make your path forward that much smoother. And I can't promise that one session will get you an automatic 180, of course, but if it helps you correct a single misconception or find a more efficient approach, it's well worth taking a quick video call with me. It's totally free. If you don't feel moved to do it, then of course, don't do it, but I leave it up to you. I just put the offer out there, and if you want my help, the link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. I'm happy to meet with anybody watching this now or later, help you craft your LSAT plan of attack, talk through your LSAT weak areas, struggles, pain points, because we can only kind of scratch the surface in this one-to-many format like I'm talking with you right now. But on a one-on-one video call, we can get more personal. I can get to know you a bit better and give you more personalized recommendations, but only if you feel like you could find it helpful. Ariane is asking, do top 14 law schools still have seats for January applicants? Yes, they do. So law schools are not evaluated based on when you applied to them. From their perspective, if you look at their incentives, they look at your LSAT score and your GPA primarily because that is what is reported to the American Bar Association, which in turn is where US News pulls their data from for inclusion in the ever important US News Law School rankings. Soft factors like application essays, resumes, letters of rec, those are not quantifiable metrics. And so they can look at those for context. They can claim they take a holistic approach, but the data indicates that those factors don't get nearly as much weight as the quantifiable metrics do, like LSAT and GPA. When you applied is not a factor in the US News rankings. It's not factored into the American Bar Association 509 reports, and so it isn't considered quite as seriously. There are still seats available in January and even in February. Law schools know that literally tens of thousands of people are taking the January LSAT. They know that a similar number are taking the February LSAT, and so they simply do not render decisions for many people who applied earlier because they want to see who else is going to come along. They know that because they've been doing this for decades, and the cycle has shifted later and later over time as law schools have looked to navigate all the uncertainty of the recent 6 years with the pandemic, the LSAT flex format, the ban on affirmative action, the removal of logic games. All of the changes created uncertainty, and law schools are quite bureaucratic and risk averse. And so they basically just took a wait and see approach to see who else will come along, who is going to retake the LSAT. And retakes have also become more common because the LSAC went from offering the LSAT 4 times a year to 8 times a year. So applicants have chosen to retake because there is no downside to retaking since law schools only average higher LSAT scores, the highest score on record. All this to say that January might have been late to apply 15 years ago, but it is not late to apply in 2026. Law schools will still have seats available, provided that you have the numbers. Just scanning through the chat here for more questions. Please keep them coming in. I'll get to as many of them as I can. Wilkes is saying, is a 3.42 a low GPA? I got an engineering degree and the GPA was low. Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that STEM majors have less grade inflation or no grade inflation relative to humanities, and law schools will consider that, but at the same time, the numbers are sadly the numbers, and law schools don't give you a 0.5 GPA boost on just because you had a tougher major. If you could go back in time and you knew that law school is what you wanted to do, maybe you would have taken a major with easier A's, but we are where we are. And so the best thing you can do at this point is just get a higher LSAT score to compensate. And if you want to pursue a STEM type of law in the future, like patent law, for example, then certainly talk about that in your application and relate it back to what you majored in. Got a question asking, do I have a higher chance of getting into a T14 if I took a gap year before applying? Then Apple users responding, yes, if it's an actual good experience. What if it's an internship that's not law related? Yeah, so I mean, a gap year is nice, not required. Could it help? Maybe. It'd be great if it were law related, just to show law schools that you have some actual exposure to the practice of law and that you're not solely informed by watching Suits or Better Call Saul, for example. But if you're not sure whether law school is right for you and you want to take a wait and see approach, not a bad idea. I wish that more folks explore the practice of law rather than just applying for lack of a better option. And take that time, by the way, take that gap year to get a higher LSAT score, put together stronger essays, collect better letters of recommendation, cultivate better relationships with your recommenders. All of that might not be a bad way to take that year. There are some folks who take a year off just to study for the LSAT. Not saying that everybody has that leisure to study for the LSAT without working, but if you can even study for the LSAT part-time and get a higher score as a result, it would be a pretty good move. No Filter Sis is asking, how can I go to law school for free? Taking the LSAT tomorrow. So first off, I mean, just nail it when you take it tomorrow. That's the best possible way to go to law school for free. I mean, the best way to get a full ride to law school is by applying with really strong numbers. Super high LSAT score, super high GPA. Law school scholarships are primarily merit-based. There are need-based scholarships as well, but that you can't really control other than whatever you show on your tax returns. The merit aid comes down to the strength of your numbers relative to the medians of the schools to which you're applying. The higher the numbers you have, the more that a lower ranked school will want to attract you in particular to attend their school. Of course, you're not likely to get a full ride to a T14 law school unless your numbers are insane. They don't hand out too many of those. But for schools outside the T14, it is highly likely that you could get a full ride if you apply with sufficiently high numbers. And it's often better to go to a lower ranked school with more scholarship money than a higher ranked school with less scholarship money. And the longer you've been out of school, the more that they will discount your undergraduate GPA in favor of your LSAT score. So if you've been out of school for 5 years, they'll discount it a bit. If you've been out for 15 years, they'll discount it a lot more. Regardless, if we wanted to look at the factors you can control, your GPA is probably pretty fixed unless you're early in undergrad. But the LSAT score, it's funny, it's a single day, 2.5 hours. It's going to weigh more heavily than all of your undergrad combined. And by the way, law schools do not factor in your master's degree GPA into their calculations. They can, of course, see your master's transcript, but they don't calculate it the same way because the American Bar Association doesn't consider it the same way, and US News doesn't factor it in either. So it's going to be your undergrad GPA plus your LSAT. If your GPA is high relative to your LSAT, no, you're not cooked. You just got to balance it. You just got to raise your LSAT score. You would be a reverse splitter if you had a high GPA, low LSAT, but the solution is just get a higher LSAT, study more, and retake it. And by the way, folks, I know that everyone's got different situations here with your GPA versus their LSAT and their time frame. I mean, I'm trying to give advice that is as generally applicable to everybody out there watching as much as I can to the greatest possible extent. But if you want me to give you more tailored, more personal advice, particular to you as a unique individual with more context on your situation, the best place for me to do that for you would be on a private one-on-one call. I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons for everybody out there watching this now or later. The link to book that call with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube if you're watching there. It's pinned in the chat on YouTube, and it's also in my bio on TikTok and Instagram. I'm happy to meet with you personally, one-on-one, and talk through your situation with you. Open offer to everybody watching this now or later. And by the way, if I haven't gotten to your question today, I'll stick around a bit longer to get to as many of those as I can. But I also offer these free lives every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific. If you find these helpful, please spread the word. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these lives, and the algorithm doesn't really boost them because they can't run ads during a live. And so please spread the word in your group chats, your Discords, your Reddit forums, Facebook groups, wherever you're talking with others studying for the LSAT. I really do appreciate your support. I'm happy to help. Cloudy's asking, I just graduated from UCLA, so congrats, Cloudy. Planning on taking the LSAT in January 2027 and applying for fall 2027. Is this a good plan? Okay, so you're taking the LSAT 1 year from now, and then you want to apply to law school to start in fall of 2027. So you'd be applying roughly, you'd be applying right after you took it to start 7 months later or so. Is that a good plan? It's not a bad plan. It's totally fine. You could probably do this sooner if you wanted to, and so you could take the LSAT in June or August of this year, 2026, apply in September of 2026, the second that applications open, and then start law school 1 year later. So I'm basically suggesting that you move up when you take the LSAT by approximately 6 months, but you don't need to change anything else. In other words, you don't need a full year to study for the LSAT, no matter what score you're trying to achieve. And my adjustment to your plan would have the benefit of allowing you to apply earlier in the cycle when it's a bit easier to get in, and there's also more scholarship money available. Your time frame that you suggested is also okay, but I think that mine has a benefit of allowing you to apply earlier given all the time that you have. If you felt like you really needed a full year to study for the LSAT, then of course take that full year. But most people with the right LSAT study plan can knock it out in 5-6 months and still achieve their fullest potential. But of course, if you want to talk through the particulars, if there's a reason why you feel like you need that full year to study for the LSAT, I'm happy to meet with you personally and talk through the reasons behind that and see the best way to take advantage of that full year if that's what you need. What's it 2 years asking? So if we take the test in June, can we still go to law school in 2026? So you're asking, can you take the LSAT in June of 2026 and then starting law school 2 to 3 months later? Yes, you technically can. There are some schools that will still take the results of the June LSAT to start law school only a few months later, but they're typically not the better law schools, and those are more unique situations. Not saying it never happens or is never a decent plan, but usually you want to have the LSAT done a bit sooner. Ideally, you want to have it done roughly 6 months before you are going to start law school. So in other words, I would typically suggest that February be the latest that you take the LSAT to start law school roughly 6 months later. Most law schools will not take the results of any LSAT after the February test. Some will take April LSAT results, some will take June results, but at that point, there is less scholarship money available. The odds of getting in are not quite as high. If you wanted to take it or retake it, then to get off a wait list, that's a different story. Of course, you could always retake it, send a letter of continued interest, and with the higher LSAT score on your record in your application, that might tip the scales in your favor. No Filter Sis is asking, do they really care too much about LSAT scores when they give out scholarships if you're a non-traditional student? Yeah, of course they care. I mean, LSAT scores are the biggest factor in what determines merit scholarships for law school. I mean, look at it from their perspective. Law school admissions officers, they want to have the strongest possible entering class, and law schools give admissions a budget from which they can give out merit scholarships. And they spend this money on scholarships to attract stronger applicants because, of course, they want to have a better student body, but they also want to raise their standing in the US News rankings because that is largely determinative of the prestige of the school. It helps them with their alumni donations, helps them with employment recruiting. And so there's a lot of reason for them to give out that money. It's an investment on their part. And so you also want to have a strong GPA, but the reason I don't talk about GPA very much is because for most applicants, by the time they're exploring the LSAT, they're already pretty late in undergrad or already have graduated undergrad, and so we can't really do anything to improve GPA. And even if you were to retake an undergrad class from college, that's going to be, what, 1 3-credit class out of over 100 credits that comprise your 4-year degree? It's going to have a pretty negligible impact. And your LSAT weighs more heavily than all of undergrad combined. So why don't we focus on the single thing that will have a disproportionate impact on your chances of getting in, that single thing being, of course, the LSAT. Thanks for all the great questions, folks. Please, of course, keep them coming. I'm just scanning through for the questions that I feel I can best answer. Got a question asking, if you're trying to get a full ride to a T14, what LSAT should you be shooting for? GPA is 392. So your GPA is already at or above the medians for the T14s, and so you're pretty good on that part. For the LSAT score, the medians are 170 to 174 for the T14, so you ideally want to be at a 175 to maximize your admissions. Not saying that you need it, but consider that schools are always looking to raise their medians, and there is rampant LSAT score inflation, just as there is GPA inflation due to easy A's in humanities. And for the question of why is there LSAT score inflation, it's a consequence of the LSAT getting easier with the removal of the logic game section, less material to study. Folks can have a more narrow focus on only logical reasoning and reading comprehension. We also have the more frequent LSAT test dates. If folks have an average higher retake rate, in other words, if the average applicant takes the LSAT more times and the highest score is the one that counts, that raises LSAT scores across the board. You also have the rise in LSAT accommodations, more folks getting extra time, extra breaks. If the LSAT is a strictly timed exam and fewer people are subject to that time constraint, then it's easier to get a higher score, have higher accuracy when you have more time. And so all of these factors combined lead to rising LSAT medians, and you've just got to have a higher LSAT score to compete with those folks. It's just the reality of the situation. So aim for the 175 if you want to maximize your T14 admissions. Cash Alex asks, dude, who cares about how you do on the LSAT and which law school you go to? Cash Alex, I'm not sure that you're in the right place here. This is an LSAT and law school admissions conversation here. So if you don't care, then this might not be the right place for you. I get a kick out of trolls sometimes. I guess considering that your LSAT score determines where you go to law school, how much scholarship money you get, and employment outcomes you have upon graduation. I mean, how you do on the LSAT and where you go to law school, it's really determining the entire trajectory of your career going forward. And so when you have a higher LSAT score, you end up with more scholarship money. You can get into better law schools. That means either more prestigious schools with better employment outcomes, better bar passage rates, or you can go to a lower ranked school and get more scholarship money. Law school, the average cost of attendance, considering tuition, books, fees, and whatnot, runs an average of $84,000. Multiply that by 3, it's roughly $250,000. So I'm not saying that you got to go to the most prestigious school. I'm not saying that you got to go to Harvard or Yale or Stanford. In many cases, it's better to go to a lower ranked school with more scholarship money than a higher ranked school with less scholarship money. And of course, if you want to go into big law, you want to do a clerkship on the Supreme Court, then maybe you want to go to Yale or Harvard or Stanford. But for a lot of folks, it might be a better choice to go to a lower ranked school, a regional law school that is lower ranked in US News, but is going to give you more scholarship money, maybe even a full ride. But regardless of whether you want big law or you want a full ride, the path to the best outcomes comes down to your LSAT score and your GPA. And so the reason I'm talking about the LSAT is because that will unlock either path, whichever one you want to take, prestige or scholarships. It could be GPA as well, but like I said, GPA for most folks watching these it's pretty fixed at this stage. So the biggest factor we can impact is going to be the LSAT score. That's what we can control. And the LSAT plus GPA are the two factors that largely determine your options for getting into better law schools and getting more scholarship money. And the cool thing is that you can play schools off each other. If you apply to several schools, maybe even a dozen or 2 dozen, you have better offers. You can negotiate scholarship money, maybe even get a full ride, and then graduate law school without debt. And now you've got better options for your future employment because you're not shackled or tied down by the debt or the limitations of having taken out massive student loans. The other factor we got to consider here is that with the elimination of the Grad Plus loans starting in July 2026, and this will affect everybody starting law school in the fall of this year, in roughly 8 months from now, there's going to be a cap of $50,000 per year on how much you can take out in loans, which means that given if the average cost of attendance is $84,000, there's a $34,000 gap between 84 and 50. $34,000 is the difference. And so you really might even need to get those merit aid scholarships to pay off the difference if you can't get it all through federal loans. And if you have to go the private loan route, then of course there's higher interest associated. So to make law school affordable and manageable for the maximal number of students, it's going to come down to getting scholarships. Now, if anyone out there is resonating with this, if you want my help getting the highest possible LSAT score to minimize your debt, get the best possible outcomes for your law school future and your career, I'm offering those free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody watching this now or later. The link again is unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer to everybody watching this now or later. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you're watching this. Happy to help. In the meantime, folks, I'll wish you all the best and take care.